I think that the business of architecture should be introduced earlier, and I think it should be something that is more of a forerunner.
Business of Architecture UK, episode 49. Ryan Willard here, Business of Architecture UK, with a very special announcement. This Wednesday, I will be leading a webinar which will be looking at how 3 leaders of top UK architecture practices have broke the mold and grown their businesses from being bedroom practices or working in the spare room to international offices with landmark projects. In this training, you will discover how these architects have gone from very humble beginnings, not knowing where work was going to come from, to building these internationally respected offices with these multi-million-pound projects that, in some cases, define city skylines. We're going to look at a number of different things. You're going to learn the 3 breakthrough secrets for building a dream practice, how you can master your messaging to attract your ideal clients, and also how to define your niche to be able to win work. So make sure that you register to the webinar. I will provide the details in the information below. So go along, register that, and I'll look forward to seeing you on Wednesday. And this week, we've got a super interview with Melissa Woolford, who is the Executive Director of the Museum of Architecture. Now, the Museum of Architecture is a fabulous charity organization that is really facilitating business development and entrepreneurship and innovative business models and a new way of approaching business specifically for architects. And so it was really great to be able to sit down with Melissa. Obviously, herself and I share a lot of common interests about business and also being able to empower the architectural industry. And she basically explained how the Museum of Architecture had come about, how it grew out of her work with the Noose Gallery, which she started in 2006. And also she touched upon her own architectural experience. She's got a master's in architecture from the Pratt Institute, and she also worked as an architectural designer for Zaha Hadid Architects, and she's got quite an incredible array of knowledge about the creative industries. So this interview is really, really interesting. She goes into a lot of the kind of common constraints that she's seen architects dealing with. And she also talks about the importance of entrepreneurship and business for people who are staying within the employment of an architectural practice and perhaps who are associates but want to get involved more in the business development and client acquisition side of practice. So sit back, relax, and enjoy Melissa Woolford. Melissa, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Absolute pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So tell me a little bit about your career. How did the Museum of Architecture begin?
So it all started when I got to Zaha Hadid's office after having studied architecture for 6 years and realizing in my first week that I didn't want to be an architect.
Whilst you were at Zaha's?
While I was at Zaha's.
Right.
I mean, it's a fantastic office and I've made incredible friends there. So the experience was definitely worth going through. But I think very early on I realized that actually being an architect wasn't for me, but I was really interested in helping the industry as a whole. So originally I started a small gallery in the front room of a friend's flat in King's Cross called Nouse Gallery with the intention of helping younger architecture practices show their work. So we did a series of exhibitions there. And then in 2014, I was noticing that there were quite a few friends of mine who were going off and starting their own practices. And I also noticed that a lot of architects just tended to talk to architects. So that's when I really decided to change the name to Museum of Architecture and turn it into a charity and set up the mission of helping the public better engage with architecture, and also by helping architects become more entrepreneurial by setting up MOA Academy as part of the museum.
So that first period from 2006 to 2014, you were kind of doing it as a side activity, or how was it?
So from 2006 to 2009, I was still at Zaha's, and
Right.
I was spending kind of my lunch times and my weekends and my evenings, sort of not having a life otherwise,
Yeah.
working on the exhibitions. So everything was done on a shoestring budget, and a lot of people chipped in to help. I had friends who helped me start it. Paul Coates and Christian Derricks were the original sort of. It was the three of us kind of working on it, and so we then started talking to developers who gave us empty spaces. This was before developers started sort of necessarily charging for spaces. So it was great. Really sort of had lots of support in that way. And then in 2009, I was able to leave. So I started another business as well on the side called Nouse Collaborative. And with that, I was hired by a friend to help them redesign their office space. So I did the whole concept design for that. They ended up not being able to do it because the legislation changed on how that particular type of work was being done. So the project never went through, but it gave me enough funding to be able to sort of to leave Zaha's and start doing different projects. I was also asked to run the architecture competition for Wild Turkey Bourbon Visitor Center in Kentucky, which was great. And again, gave me some income. It also helped me work with brands and look at how brands could benefit from really good architecture. So that particular project won the most prominent A award for the state of Kentucky that year, which was great because it gave me a really good case study to be able to go to different people and say, look at the value of architecture. They were getting lots of press. They got a lot of visitors because of that. So it was a really interesting way for me to say that, look at the power of architecture.
And what were the some of, because that's a really interesting experience, being someone who's being an advocate for architecture into other disciplines and industries. How has that experience with Noose informed what you're doing now with the Museum of Architecture?
So what it does is it really helps me identify with potential sponsors. So, what can we actually do for this particular brand who might be interested in sponsoring a project that we're working on? So I feel like I have the experience and the knowledge to be able to talk about how those particular brands could get involved in the projects that we do. So for example, like Gingerbread City, we work with various different brands, and it's how do the brands kind of amplify what they want to get out of the project. And I can, from having worked with these various other brands, I can help them really identify those.
So just for people who don't know what Gingerbread City is, can you explain a little bit about that? Because this is a fantastic item that should be in all architects' calendars each year.
So Gingerbread City started because I went to an exhibition of sort of just Christmas time. It was sort of a Christmas time event, and I saw 4 large gingerbread houses designed by bakers, and I thought, wouldn't it be amazing to have an entire city made out of gingerbread designed by architects? And again, it really fit into our mission of helping the public better engage with architecture. So we got in touch with South Kensington Estate. So we said, can we use one of your empty shop fronts in South Kensington? And they gave us a space, and we had it master planned by Tibbald's Planning and Urban Design, who have been incredible supporters and sponsors for us over the past 3 years. So it started in 2016. We had over 50 architecture practices participate in that first year. And so the architects respond to the master planning brief. So there's everything from kind of fire stations and schools and hospitals. Everything you'd find in a real city is there in Gingerbread City in gingerbread form. And so the architects design it, they bake it, they construct it, and they bring it. We give them the particular plot, and then they bring it on the plot. And and it's just expanded. So that first year we had about 16,000 people come through. Last year we were invited by the V&A to host it with them. So we held it with them. We had over 24,000 people. But that's just because we couldn't get more people in. It sold out in the first week. So yeah, it's a really exciting project. And for us, the response has been, this is amazing to see what architects can do. And people have come up to me as well in the exhibition and said, I've never really been interested in architecture before, but this has really opened my eyes to what architects do. We also have sort of part of it is an exhibition as well, explaining the theme for the past year. So we've got everything from how do you master plan a city, what's a future city, an eco city. This year we're going to be looking at transport. So every year there's this particular theme that we want to get these messages out to the public. But through the medium of gingerbread, which everyone can kind of relate to, because most people at some point in their life have done a gingerbread house, or have helped their kids make one, or have done them with their grandparents. So it's really relatable, which are the kind of projects that we like to do.
And is this very much part of the mission of the Museum of Architecture, is to be able to make and communicate what it is architects do to a wider audience?
Absolutely. I mean, we all the projects that we do on the public side have to go through that filter. Is this going to be accessible in terms of the language that we use, in terms of the actual particular projects that we have? We always try and make sure it's something that people have been exposed to before in another way, and sort of how do architects make it different? How do architects add the extra element? Because then it becomes exciting, and to be able to communicate what architects do and what architecture is really important.
Could you give me an example of some other ways that you do that?
Sure. So we've done another project called Sandcastles, where we commissioned architects to do 2.5 meter high by 2.5 meter wide sandcastles, and those were through the RBKC, through the borough. And so we had one in front of the Design Museum by Asif Khan. We had one in Duke of York Square by Next Architects, and one up in Notting Hill by VPPR. So that was great. And the one in Duke of York Square was really interactive, because we actually built a sand pit below the one designed by the architects, where kids could actually then play and sort of replicate and make their own sandcastle. So again, it's just about people sort of happening upon these architectural elements sort of within their everyday sort of goings on, and then also being able to get everyone involved, so from kids through adults through grandparents.
And so that's the kind of the public face, like interfacing with the public, or people who perhaps don't know or come into contact with architecture on a daily basis. Yeah. What is it that you do to support the industry, or within the architectural practices? How are you supporting those kinds of businesses?
Sure. So we have a program called MOA Academy, which we started a few years ago, because again, I had friends who were starting their own architecture practices who just were really struggling because they just didn't know how to run a business. They were great designers, but just didn't know how to run a business. And so I thought, how can we help them just do that and be able to sort of get on with the design side? So we run different courses, workshops that are almost every Thursday of the year, and everything from business development to marketing to accounting. I mean, all different types of courses, and we bring experts in to run those courses who lead them. We have a great network of consultants that we work with. And but then we also have our Directors Club and our Associates Club. And we started that because we realized that there was so much conversation happening at these workshops, but actually there wasn't time to really get into the way that everyone runs their practice. And so the Directors Club is meant to be a forum for people to really open up and share their best practice. So it's incredible sort of how open these architects of these practices are. We sort of cap it at about 20 practices per cohort. We're now in our third cohort because it's been so successful at really allowing people to kind of benchmark their own practice and seeing how other people do things differently in order to be most efficient. And the idea is that everyone learns from each other. So where one person is good at something, the other person might be good at something else. And by sharing that, everyone benefits. And because of the success of that, we have recently started our Associates Club, which is a bit more of a training course. But we found that a lot of associates are sort of promoted, but there may or may not be any training for them to sort of move into this new role. So the idea was to get the training that they need to be associates, but then also to help them better think about what career path they may want to have and how to develop that, but then also being kind of a room for a sounding board for these sort of associate level architects to talk about how things are done in different practices and what might they be able to take to their practice to do things differently and better. So we're looking at then hopefully expanding that sort of through every stage of an architect's career. But those are the two programs that we have currently.
That's really fascinating. So actually you're doing stuff which is kind of focused towards people running their own practices, and also people who are actually looking to progress their careers within larger scale practices. Yeah. And what are the sort of the themes that you're encountering a lot with architects? What are the common sort of pain points or the sort of themes that come up again and again and again that architects are experiencing?
I think it's tricky. I think, especially right now, a lot of architects aren't obviously sure what's going to happen with Brexit.
Yeah.
But we just find that there are a lot of different waves happening in architecture. So some architects get a lot of work for maybe 2 or 3 years, and then all of a sudden, there's sort of a dry spell. And I think it's part of the reason that we see is that architects are so busy running the projects that they forget to do the business development side of it. But then it's also looking at kind of how the architecture practice is structured. So just what are the different models that are available to people? For example, if you look at Mass Group, based out of the US, they are a non-for-profit architecture practice. They work in multiple different sites. They get grants for projects. They initiate their own projects. So as well for us, it's also about exposing architects to different ways of working and sharing with them different kinds of practices and how they operate. But I think that, business development is always a tricky one for people. I think marketing, just knowing how to get their name out there, how to differentiate themselves as well. A lot of architects on their websites, they're award-winning practices. Well, most of them are award-winning practices. So beyond that, how do you differentiate yourself? How do you write about yourself? So again, that you're relatable to the people who might hire you. There's something, as we all know, that there's architecture speak and then speak that sort of other people might understand. So it's just making sure that they're writing about their work in sort of interesting ways that people can then, decide that they might want to hire them based on.
And what are the kind of common themes that you see occurring in the conversations of people working within practices and who are looking to progress their career to that associate route? Is there a similarity between that conversation and the conversations that's happening in independent practices?
Yeah, I think that the struggles are sort of similar. I think time management is always a big one, and also leadership as well. I think a lot of associates want to be good leaders. They might not know how. They might not know how to sort of deal with different situations. So I think those are very sort of similar between the director level and the associate level, and I think quite a few of those associates probably want to go off and start their own practices at some point as well. So I think most associates probably want to learn a bit more about how the business is run. And, depending on the practice and depending on the director, there may be sort of more or less levels of transparency. But actually, I think for the industry, the more the directors are able to share how the business is actually run with that associate level architects, I think they would really understand why decisions are being made, and when mistakes happen, why, and I think the industry will benefit as a whole, because as those associates go off and start their own practices, they'll benefit from that knowledge and that experience, and hopefully not make those mistakes in their own practice.
And for you, what kinds of things do you think are interesting in terms of like innovative business models that give architects more diversity or opportunity to be able to, protect their businesses over the long term?
Yeah, I think just being innovative in the way that they start their projects. I think that's something I think a lot of architects feel like they need to be hired by people. And actually, I think there's a lot of ways that architects can initiate projects themselves. Like, for example, if you look at Studio Octopi with the Thames Bath project, it's such a great idea. There's so many sort of opportunities there. It's just trying to figure out ways of realizing those projects. Can you partner with various community groups to see something come to fruition? Can you look at different causes? What are the pain points for, let's say, people with different medical issues, for people who've suffered from strokes, from people who've suffered from other illnesses? What are ways that architects can kind of innovate to help those particular people? And maybe there are lessons to be learned about that, and maybe there are certain projects that can come out of those for the benefit of everyone. So I just think it's kind of looking for opportunities. I also think it's reaching out to different industries. So we've run 2 conferences on neuroscience and architecture. So where neuroscientists are looking at ways that people use spaces, is there an opportunity there for architects to do projects with neuroscientists and develop things further, whether they're just maybe theoretical projects or whether they're real projects? But I see the industry becoming more multidisciplinary kind of as we grow, and I think architects have to decide, what industries are they interested in, which again helps them to differentiate themselves from other people and potentially work in different ways.
And how's your own personal experience in running an organisation in a business? How does that influence how you communicate with architects or can facilitate other sorts of business expertise for architects?
Yeah, I think being a director myself and having a team of people that I lead and that I mentor, and having kind of similar issues of having to bring money in to pay staff, pay rent, pay everything else that we need to pay, and also to support our projects. I think I have sort of similar concerns and similar issues. So hopefully I can relate to them in terms of just the business side of just running a business.
And how is your business set up? You were saying earlier it's set up as a charity?
Yes, so we are a charity, and one of the reasons for that is that we just want to make sure that architects understand that everything we do is for them, in order for them to grow, to learn, to benefit. Even the public projects that we do is all about helping the public understand what architects do in order to hopefully hire architects in the future. So everything that we do is really sort of for architects, and it's very much about giving back to the industry. So all the money that comes in goes back out to programs and projects for them. The more that we can do for free, the more subsidized programming we can do, the better. So we're just working at ways of being able to do more. We'd like to become a grant-giving body. So kind of like the Graham Foundation is for the US, we would like to become the grant-giving body for the UK and be able to help people do more research, do more innovation, and just generally support entrepreneurship in architecture.
So you'd be actually a body that was able to facilitate grants for architects to be able to do their own projects.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's really exciting.
We are working. So we're working towards that, and obviously having our own permanent space as well to be able to have a series of exhibitions constantly running and to be educating people about architecture.
And how do you see your relationship with some of the institutional bodies of architecture? And do you work in conjunction with them? Are you supportive, or do you think that there are things that the governing bodies could be doing better?
Yeah, I think we operate very independently of other organizations. There's so many great organizations out there in the UK, but I really feel like our mission is to educate the public about architecture and just make sure that the programming that we do facilitates that through doing these projects that exist in public spaces, and the entrepreneurship courses, very much about just generally supporting architects.
And where do you think, in your experience as an architect and in architectural education, do you think that architectural education, there is more scope for entrepreneurship coming in at an earlier stage as a discussion, and how could that be facilitated?
Yeah, although it's hard, because I think until you've actually worked and you understand what it means to be an architect in practice, I think it's hard to understand what the business of architecture might be. So I think the schools that have work placements are really valuable because it allows people to get into practice and really understand what it means to work as an architect. And so therefore what the challenges might be, and sort of in terms of the business side of it as well, what's going on. But I think that the business of architecture should be introduced earlier. And I think it should be something that is more of a forerunner. And I think that architecture schools do projects that potentially can be, let's say, commercialized, or perhaps, there's some brand alignment. So I think that schools should perhaps explore those areas a bit more and see how the projects that their students are creating could then go off and either become projects themselves, or they should encourage them to try to develop them a bit further so that they can be realized. And then as soon as they try to realize the projects, they will come across these bigger issues of, how they're funded, how to organize them, project management, all those skills that will benefit them when they become an architect. And so by having that experience, I think that would be valuable earlier on than just doing theoretical projects.
Yeah. And so what's next for the Museum of Architecture? What have you got planned for 2019, and how are you growing over the next few years?
So hopefully we will have a permanent space within the next few years. We are also launching a School for Creative Thinkers this year, which has come out of all the workshops that we've done for our families. So over the past 3 years, we've had 1,800 people participate in our gingerbread house making workshops. And a lot of people say, well, what else do you do for the rest of the year? And so we decided to start a program for families, which is launching on April 27th. And it's all based on biomimicry. So it's looking at how animals build their homes, and then how that relates to architecture, and then creating projects around that. So for example, we'll be looking at birds' nests, and then we'll look at the Bird's Nest Stadium, the Olympic Stadium, and then we'll have the kids do weaving as a means of making an architectural structure. So whether that they decide to make it a home or a pavilion or whatever they'd like to do, but the concept of weaving is the architectural element that comes out of the bird's nest. So we'll be looking at lots of different animals and kind of how they build their homes, and then how that then relates to architecture, and getting kids to sort of think in those kinds of ways. And so that'll be our first course, and then we'll keep developing that further. We are also working on our treehouse project that we're hoping to do next year, and that will be 5 tree houses in a public park. So we're just the very sort of early stages of that project, but that's really exciting. And we've got a pavilion going in King's Cross this year for London Festival of Architecture. And we are also in our 3rd year of a platform for women to speak. So it's a kind of a women in architecture conference, but it's not about women in architecture. It's just it's a platform for women to speak based on a particular topic. So, and we also have a playground going up in Sloane Square, and that is a collaboration between an artist and an architect, Lily Jenks, and that'll be up for the month of June as well. So yeah, there's lots going on. And
if there are young practices or architects listening to this podcast, how's the best way for them to get involved with some of your trainings, your development, your courses?
Sure. So it's they can look on our website, which is museumofarchitecture.org, and they can find all of our programming there.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Melissa, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
So that is a wrap. Thank you for listening. The views expressed on this show by my guests do not represent those of the host, and I make no representation, promise, guarantee, pledge, warranty, contract bond, or commitment, except to help you be unstoppable.